Hello, and welcome to my first lecture in the series on international education. More than ever, countries have started to notice what other countries are doing in education. One country that attracts attention is South Korea. This is because of its strong performance in international measures of educational achievement. That is, when its students are compared with those of other countries. In this talk, I'll focus on the Korean commitment to digitized education, or computer-based learning. I'll describe some of their recent initiatives in this area, particularly the government's desire to extend access to educational opportunities to all students. I'll then place these in the wider context of Korean education's achievements, methods, and philosophy. Finally, I'll note some of the criticisms that have been made about Korean education and the counter-arguments to these criticisms. How the Koreans defend themselves against these criticisms. But first, let's look at what's happened to Korea over the last 50 years or so. Since the end of its disastrous civil war in the early 1950s, Korea has transformed itself from a developing nation into a leading industrial economy. This is thanks largely to its success in raising educational standards. Korea has one of the most educated populations in the world. About 70% of Koreans complete university education. Compare this with about 25% in the United States. This highly educated workforce has contributed to the country's meteoric economic rise, from an agricultural society weakened by war to its position among the world's 15 biggest economies. Korean society is highly competitive. Families place high value on education, and students show a strong commitment to learning. Koreans say this is a necessity. Because their country has few national resources, it has to rely on the quality of its people. So, what exactly have the Koreans done to bring this about? Well, government policies support education with above average spending. In fact, after Iceland, Korea spends a greater proportion of GDP on education than any other developed country. And the Koreans are leaders in digital technology. In the 1990s, the authorities were quick to recognize the potential of information and communication technology, or ICT, in education, and launched a master plan to develop ICT infrastructure. The goal was 1 PC per teacher and internet access in all classrooms. Since then, they have set out to enhance education quality by providing open access to content and by training teachers to integrate ICT into classroom teaching. So the approach has been twofold: providing the infrastructure and also providing the training. One of their major objectives has been to reduce the inequalities in access to education, and ICT is seen as a key to achieving that goal. Since 2005, all students have had access to digital tutoring provided by the Korea Educational Broadcasting System. There is also a $2.4 billion strategy to digitize the nation's entire school curriculum by 2015. At the core of this ambitious project is the implementation of digital textbooks. What are these? They are interactive versions of traditional textbooks that can be constantly updated in real time. Digital textbooks contain a combination of print materials like textbooks, reference books, workbooks, dictionaries. But they also, and this makes them very different from traditional textbooks, they also contain multimedia content, such as video clips, animations, and virtual reality programs that can be tailored to students' abilities and interests. The material is customizable. It can be matched to the individual student. So in the light of what I'm going to say later about the Korean system's uniformity, this is significant. Students interact with these materials. They can underline sections, take notes, reorganize pages, and create hyperlinks to online material. So this is genuinely innovative and puts the country well ahead of most of its competitors. Korea has a very strong digital sector, and the project is taking advantage of this. Wireless networks will be installed in all schools to support a completely digitized education system. Policymakers say it is designed to respond to 21st century education challenges by moving from uniform and standardized education to diversified, creative-based learning. Korean education has sometimes been criticized for stifling creativity, but in fact, in the 2012 PISA tests, an internationally recognized test that compares student performance worldwide, Korean students came just behind Singapore in problem solving. And Korea is proud that its system is inclusive. It tries not to leave anyone behind. In many countries, in Australia, for example, there is a huge gap between the achievements of students from different socio-economic backgrounds, between rich and poor, city and rural. But in Korea, there was a smaller disparity within and across schools in problem solving than the OECD average. There was less of a gap between the best and the worst Korean students than in Singapore, Shanghai, Hong Kong, or other leading Asian centers. Korean educators point to this as evidence of the fairness of their system. They say their system is not just focused on the high achievers or on those from privileged backgrounds. Giving everybody access to new learning modes, the Koreans argue, will further help to bridge the education divide between families who can afford to pay for private tutoring and those that can't. Electronic technology costs money, so the government has promised to subsidize equipment purchases for poorer families. And the first tests of the system are promising. They show measurable improvements in the performance of students from less well-off families and students in remote areas. The experiment is having results. On an international level, Korean students do remarkably well. They have consistently been among the leaders in PISA. In 2009, Korea was second among OECD countries in reading tests, fourth in mathematics, and sixth in science. In 2012, they had slipped a little to fifth, and seventh, respectively, but was still very high. Teaching is a low-status occupation in some countries, but Korea looks after its teachers. They are very well paid. In 2009, a lower secondary teacher with 15 years experience earned the equivalent of 195% of Korea's annual GDP per capita, compared with an average of 124% in OECD countries. Teachers also spend less time in the classroom than in many other OECD countries, and more time on class preparation and administrative work. However, despite its excellent results in international tests, the Korean system has its critics. They say the system is highly regimented, leaving little room for personal differences. Kim Won-suk, a principal in a middle school in Seoul, illustrates this by comparing American and Korean swim instructors. The American coaches guide swimmers to find their own best personalized style. But the Koreans lay down the law in everything: the methods, the technique, how to practice. And this is the way, she says, it is in the schools. The system is focused on exam results. Any learning that does not contribute to high marks is ignored or discouraged. There is no time for recreational reading or private passions and hobbies. The system, critics claim, stifles creativity and individual expression. This is exemplified in the Korean cram schools, known as Hagwon. Pressure to get marks and enter prestigious universities has given birth to this billion-dollar industry of private schools that coach students after regular school hours. Teenagers often stay at Hagwon until midnight, and they catch up on sleep in school. A 13-hour school day is normal. The psychological pressures are huge. The nation has one of the highest suicide rates in the world for the under 40s, and this spikes when exam results are released. And the educational expenses for parents are colossal. They pay almost 20% of the costs of educating their school children, much more than the OECD average. $1 in 5. Middle-class parents can pay around $800 a month for private tuition. It is sometimes said that this is one of the reasons for the country's low birth rate, which is the lowest in the OECD. The government is alert to the problem, and it did try to help parents by banning out-of-school tuition, but this was unpopular, and in 2000 it was declared unconstitutional. The courts ruled that it was illegal. Moreover, critics argue that the Korean system, with its emphasis on rote learning, learning by memorizing, holds back the gifted. The lack of Korean Nobel Prize winners is sometimes mentioned. The idea is that the system produces very good students, but few exceptional ones. Defenders respond that all learning involves a certain amount of learning by rote. To excel at drawing, they point out, you have to learn to sketch. To excel at singing, you have to practice vocal exercises. Even talented soccer players spend a fair bit of time running around the field and lifting weights. There is no necessary contradiction, they say, between rote learning and innovation. They point out that students in China and Japan also undergo similar or even more intensive rote learning, but are still among the top ranked in the world for research outcomes. It is more a matter of the research environment and funding opportunities. Now that the Korean government is beginning to invest in research, defenders say, the Nobel Prizes will start to roll in. To conclude, we've looked at what Korean education has achieved and its current bid to prepare students for the demands of the 21st century. We've seen how Korea stacks up against other developed nations and noted the debate that rages about the strengths and weaknesses of the educational system. In the next lecture, we'll look at another model of educational leadership, Finland. Thanks for your attention.